Eh bien maintenant, c'est la parole à Reinhard Kahle de l'université de Tübingen pour Poincare, Hilbert, Gonseth and Bernays. It's your time.
Thank you very much. Let's say the organizers for organizing that, but in particular, vielen Dank to Gerhard for all the work on Poincare and many other things. In fact, I met Gerhard, well, it's some 25 years ago at least. And at that time, I mean, he were actually looking for collaborators here at the new founded archive, Henri Poincare. But unfortunately, as you realize, I don't speak French. Well, I don't know whether you realize, but I speak English because I don't speak French. And but by chance, I speak German. And so I moved over the time, instead of looking to Poincare, more to Hilbert. And it turned out that there are plenty of relations, of course, between Poincare and Hilbert. I mean, it's known they were the leading mathematicians at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And so, naturally, with respect to the, how to say that, to that period of mathematics, and in particular philosophy of mathematics, Gerd and I have some common interests or interactions. But as you see from the title, there is actually a second relation, or let's say a second topic, which also plays a role. And well, I mean, here you don't need the photo, you see the original sitting here, but there are two books you should know, at least I was knowing. And well, when I found it, Gerhard, and I told him that I found this book, he said, oh Gott, das ist die Dissertation. Well, in his PhD thesis, he actually worked on Ferdinand Gonseth, and I think it's a quite interesting figure, which is somehow, I don't want to say he is forgotten, but he's overshadowed, and I mean, he never, but even at his lifetime, I think he didn't have the appropriate impact. And so, why Gonseth now is of interest? Well, you saw from the title, because there is an interesting relation to Paul Bernays, who, of course, has also a natural link to David Hilbert. And so I will explore a little bit what at the end will be more or less a square of people staying together. Well, then there's that second book, which I think is the habilitation, which, well, doesn't show in the German title that it's actually about Poincare, between object construction and structure analysis. And well, I mean, I came here not with a specific questions. We have a lot of specific questions, for instance, about the predicativity in Poincare, which could be compared with the philosophy of mathematics, the positions Hilbert had. No, I mean, I want to give some kind of bold thesis to be discussed, that we can have really a dialogue on certain aspects. And well, maybe it will not be so visible in the slides which follow, but Strukturen or structure seems to be a key element which, I mean, philosophy of mathematics, I mean, it is taken into account today. Structuralism is a certain term, but I think not with sufficient historical reflection on what was about, I mean, what was the structuralism, if it was structuralism, but what was the notion of structure for Poincare, for Hilbert, for Gonseth, for Bernays. Okay, so let me start. Well, these two guys, I mean, usually I put the names and the living years, but I mean, we all know. I think that's not to be specified more, or do you confuse them? No. So here comes the first thesis to be discussed. Actually, it's too bold that we cannot discuss it here. Otherwise, we would nobody else could speak any longer. But my thesis is that the philosophies of mathematics of Poincare and Hilbert are actually compatible. Well, in fact, complementary. And I mean, there are specific aspects, for instance, that about predicativity, which will not be addressed here. But I mean, it's by no means Hilbert is against predicativity. It should not be all. And so what he were wanting to have more was somehow developed in Hilbert's program. But unfortunately, Poincare could not comment on that any longer, as we know. So to substantiate the thesis here a little bit, I mean, I was quite surprised. I mean, consistency implies existence. It's one of the lemmas which is attributed to Hilbert, and you find it in the correspondence with Frege, but you don't find it on record. I mean, I didn't find anywhere where he said explicitly this sentence. I mean, you can derive it, but Poincare said it. I mean, there is, not in English, he said it in French. So that is actually something which, of course, Brouwer were questioning. I mean, but with Poincare, Hilbert was here on the same side. The point was that Poincare was a little bit more skeptical about what could be consistent. There's this famous citation that about Zermelo's set theory, that maybe he were putting the wolf into the sheep yard. And now, of course, the standard term for Poincare's position in philosophy of mathematics is conventionalism. But I think that actually regards the choice of different theories, and actually about that formula maybe one can discuss, because in the very beginning, all this, the beginning of the 20th century, these theories were not yet formal. But Hilbert, his Beweis theory, and I mean, I by purpose avoid the term formalism, because I mean that was Brouwer's term for that direction, and Bernays put it on record somewhere that Hilbert wasn't a formalist. Nonetheless, that he wrote some text which could give the impression that he was. But Beweis theory, proof theory, that was the area, I mean, and the term Hilbert were proposing by himself, and that regards the study of formal systems as such. And it does not regard yet the choice of one or the other. In fact, if you read the introduction or preface of Grundlagen der Mathematik, which, I mean, the text was written by Bernays, but actually it is said that that was the only part where he had serious discussions with Hilbert about when he wrote Grundlagen der Mathematik. That's clearly said, okay, we need some other inhaltliche, contentual criteria to choose a specific theory, but I mean, that's not the topic of the book. The topic of the book is, okay, as soon as I have one formal theory, what happens in that theory? So the choice of a specific theory is a second thing, and there Poincare can come in. As I said, it can be complementary to the study of the formal theories itself. Nonetheless, that, of course, Poincare did not comment, as far as I know, on formal theories as such, because in his lifetime, it was, the formalization of theories were not pushed so far. Actually, for Poincare, another citation here, which is interesting, when he really put on record that one theory is not truer than another, but more convenient, I think. And it's also in French. But the interesting thing is that only we mathematicians or logicians can actually put a comparative for true. And that is actually something where, I mean, where he made clear that we have a certain choice. And I think that is fully in accordance with Hilbert's position. Okay. Then there's but let's say there are many detailed discussions we can continue about predicativity, for instance, where we will have still at least one talk. There were Poincare's review of Grundlagen der Geometrie, which, well, I mean, could give rise to discussions of divergences between Poincare and Hilbert. But I want to make now one specific question about Hilbert's proof theory. I mean, he gave his first idea in 1904 at the International Congress of Mathematicians in Heidelberg, and then Poincare criticized that because of a potential vicious circle, that the use of induction, that Hilbert uses or need to use induction to justify induction. And indeed, let's say, Hilbert's activities got stuck at this point, but, and I mean, that is one of, I think, for me, it's the biggest ironies in logic history. He found a solution. No, he didn't find the solution. Brouwer gave it to him. And Brouwer makes a point out of it that, oh, maybe you can use weak induction to justify strong induction. And Brouwer says it was in 1909 when they were walking in Schneevedingen, I think. And so here's the question. Would Poincare be happy with this solution? As far as I know, I mean, he had no chance to comment on it because it was published and discussed by Hilbert only later. Now, there's another subtlety, of course. I mean, with Gödel, we know that this doesn't work, at least not straightforward. But even if we look to Gensen's work, it's transfinite induction, but it's weak in a certain sense. And I mean, the full program of Hilbert, let's say, to use certain theories, and now I say certain, it should be weak ones, but after Gödel, we can only say certain theories to justify other ones. I mean, would be that something Poincare would buy, having in mind that he said consistency implies existence. Okay, so this, just let's say, to have some theses and questions about Poincare and Hilbert for the discussion. Now, shortly, that I think is not really to discuss here, and I think, I mean, here there are not big controversies about Hilbert and Bernays. I mean, we all know that Bernays wrote the Grundlagen der Mathematik, and I mean, he carried out to a certain extent, or he was supervisor of the students of Hilbert, which carried out the technical part of Hilbert's program. Well, for this relation, I just want to make the point that if you look, Hilbert approached the foundational issues from a purely mathematical perspective. He was not a philosopher, and in particular, I mean, he had nothing in common with this idea of philosophy first. So it was not that he had a philosophical idea and were carrying that out, and if it fails, oh, then his philosophy failed. No, I mean, he tried out, he looked, I mean, what was around? Logicism. Give logicism a chance. In the 10s, he were investigating Russell and Weiden, and then he came to the conclusion, oh, it doesn't work. So he just he changed, so to speak, the approach, but let's say always having in mind, let's say, that there should be certain, I mean, added value from the mathematical perspective. So, and now if you look to the writings of Hilbert, this is the strong thesis, all philosophical reflections were provided by Bernays. Yeah, in fact, I mean, Hilbert hired him for that. I mean, it was his job to provide it. And so, I mean, I don't even put it as a thesis, but as a final verdict. Any serious evaluation of the philosophical base of Hilbert's program needs to take Bernays' writing into account. That I think everybody can subscribe, but even rather than Hilbert's, let's say, I mean, Hilbert's only insofar Bernays provided him with the arguments, put it forward there. So, so that shifts all the philosophical burden on the shoulders of Bernays. And so here comes the interesting point, let's say the point where I'm particularly interested in. That's the relation between Bernays and Ferdinand Gonseth. Bernays, at the end of, well, when he was quite old, he published a collection of papers on the philosophy of mathematics. I mean, old papers he had with some comments. But in particular, I think he put there on record, that his philosophical ideas were influenced by Kant, Nelson, and Gonseth. Now, first of all, of course, I mean, pretty sure that Gonseth's influence could have started only in the 1930s when Bernays actually moved for the second time to Zurich. I think, let's say, during the 20s, I'm pretty sure that Bernays didn't know anything particular of Gonseth, if he even had published something at that time. So it's after the collaboration with Hilbert, so it regards, should we call it, the later Bernays. And now the influence of Kant and Nelson is comparatively easy to identify. I mean, it could be also a topic, but it's not the topic of this conference. But what about the influence of Gonseth on the later philosophy of mathematics of Bernays? I mean, if he says he was influenced by Gonseth, well, what was this influence? And that's something, I mean, for that we have Gerhard and this book, because, I mean, to my knowledge, this is actually maybe the only book which deals with Gonseth and philosophy of mathematics. Maybe you know more.
There are no books about Esfeld wrote articles
okay.
about it.
Yeah. So now, here comes my point about Bernays. So, I mean, I'm not a Gonseth expert at all, but I mean, to a certain extent, I know Bernays. And now if you look, the philosophy of mathematics of Paul Bernays does not only provide a solid base of Hilbert's Beweis theory, that was his job when he was in Göttingen in the 20s, a part of the job actually, the technical elaboration also, but it also vindicates, if you look to the later work, a certain form of structuralism, which, for instance, was promoted by Bourbaki. And that is actually in the later Bernays. And so, well, Gonseth's philosophy of mathematics is somehow obscure and had apparently no impact on a greater audience at his time, but it had this impact on Bernays. But which impact was it? So this is my conjecture, that the structuralist elements in Bernays' philosophy of mathematics may match with ideas of Ferdinand Gonseth. So that was what I said at the beginning, that maybe, I mean, the structuralist element comes in. Because the structuralist element is not really in Hilbert's Beweis theory. It's compatible with it, but if you look to the papers of the 20s, I think you don't even find the word structure. I mean, later Bernays, just one thing I really like to refer to is he had the term in German, bezogene Existenz, so referring or relating existence, which clearly made clear that existence is relative, and now we would say to a structure. But that is not in the early work of Bernays, as far as I know. Okay, well, there were still two people missing to be combined, Gonseth and Poincare, and well, I mean, this is now really the question to Gerhard. I mean, are there reliable links between the philosophical positions of Gonseth and Poincare, and maybe even, if only to close the square, where we have here the four figures I was mentioning. And I mean, when I show you this square where, I mean, I don't know whether, I mean, Gonseth is independent or influenced. I mean, he cannot be completely independent when you do philosophy of mathematics in the 30s. I mean, you have to go back to Hilbert and Poincare naturally. But in any case, what I would say that from these four people, we learn more about philosophy of mathematics than of many other modern philosophers of mathematics. Okay, I hope that gives some material for a dialogue and discussion, and thank you very much.
Merci aussi pour ces différentes questions. Je vais essayer de répondre surtout, évidemment, c'est la première qui me... Peut-être je vais donner une réponse un petit peu surprenante, c'est-à-dire pas du tout on oppose, en opposition à Mike Amick Detlefsen qui a évidemment travaillé là-dessus. Donc, I should speak English. What Poincare was to now between 1905 and his death 1912 is why the induction principle is epistemologically more suspect in the object language than in the meta language. According to the testimony of Bernays, Hilbert restarted his work on proof theory, you reported it, only in 1917, 1920, being encouraged, among other things, by opposition to Brouwer and Weil. His answer boils down the fact that at the object level, formal strong induction can be identified with the ideal propositional schema in whose conclusion a null quantifier signals instance generality, while in the conclusion of the contentual weak induction, instead of a quantifier with an associated variable, a parameter occurs. In other words, the generalized result of the weak induction is a statement that does not presuppose the completed totality of numbers, while the result of formal induction thus does. I quote Hilbert, 1927, Foundations of Mathematics. Two distinct methods come into play. On the one hand, contentual induction, and on the other hand, formal induction proper, which is based on the induction action and through which alone the mathematical variable can begin to play its role in the formal system. I mean, this is the important point, that here the variable can play its role in the formal system. Does Hilbert succeed in securing the strong induction in the object language by a weak induction in the meta language, according to his program? Poincare could not answer this question because he chose a date. From the point of view of reconstruction, however, Poincare's problem is already the justification or the clarification of the status of weak induction. This is Poincare's problem. It is not the strong induction. The consistency proof, Hilbert claims, uses only inductive procedures, but not an axiom of induction. On the contrary, I think here Steiner is right, that the consistency proof must assure that every proof of any length that is not a proof of P and non-P. So the consistency proof must assure that every proof of any length is not a proof of P and non-P. Every proof of any length. To guarantee that the inductive procedure works for any given integer, one needs induction axiom of a higher order. One needs a meta-language induction axiom to guarantee the meta-language procedures works in general. I mean, you can have procedures. You can have procedures for 1 million, but not for any length. I cannot see it. So I cannot agree with Detlef's judgment that Poincare's argument is seriously fallacious. And this, I think, is independently of Gödel's and Genseth's result. So, an abstraction of this. So this is my first answer. I think Poincare is right, as you have, if the weak induction is not in any way not sufficient to assure the strong induction. Now, the second question. Bernays and Gonseth. You say there's a structuralistic point of view. Yes, this is an important point. But there is another point. This is the Neo-Friesian tradition. So I have to explain it. In 1926, Gonseth published in his first philosophical book, Les fondements des mathématiques de la géométrie d'Euclide à la relativité générale et à l'intuitionnisme. In one of his main philosophical theses in this book concerns the relation between empirical and rational factors in a knowledge taken over by Bernays. There is in all experimentation an abstract residue, in all mathematical abstraction an intuitive residue. The distinction between the abstract and the experimental is not a matter of essence, but a matter of tendency. This is Gonseth. and this is taken over by Bernays. In his biography, this is edited by Gert-Heinz Müller, Bernays wrote, I quote, "On the basis of my reflection on the country's Nelson philosophy, I came very near to Gonseth's opinion, and so I joined his philosophical school." In fact, Bernays attended as student the lectures of Leonard Nelson, the principal representative of the school. As Bernays points out, present-day science exhibits rational tendency, often disregarded, but present in the country's philosophy. This tendency concerns the enlargement of fundamental transcending of the contentual or the intuitive given by the forms of reasoning and lead in Nelson's approach to its climb of the intuitive but at the same time rational character of geometrical knowledge. Bernays conceives the relation between sensible and intuition and the geometrical as an idealization directed by the norm of pure intuition which remains for Nelson a priori. Indeed, Bernays required already in 1920 a clarification which Gonseth's dialectical idealism is intended to satisfy. I quote, "The discussion should at the same time have to clarify the methods of mathematical realization and with this give a satisfying answer to Nelson's questions what the form of an idealization could be if it doesn't lie in pure intuition." So this switch from the object level to reflect on the method, this is coming from Nelson. In 1942, Bernays wrote to Gödel that he had already in his 1920 paper rejected a formalist interpretation of the Hilbert program. Moreover, the finitist reasoning satisfying an ideal of evidence is discreetly questioned, and Bernays doubted also the value of the concept of the a priori. In any way, surely reinforced by Genson's result, he summarized this point of view in 1938 as follows, I quote, "The recent development of Hilbert's proof theory led to a revision of the philosophical point of view. This letter forces us to recognize that it is impossible to trace a strict demarcation line between evident and suspect reasoning." His disagreement with the initial Hilbert program led him to the Gonsethian transformation of the Neo-Frisian intuition. So this is a very important, for me, important remark of Bernays. So that's this vague demarcation line between the evident and the suspect, and this is my motivation for to work on predicativity as well. As for Gonseth, yes, now the structural point of view. He once more refers to a paper of Gonseth, where the rule of structure with respect to axiomatic and formalization is examined. He introduces Gonseth's distinction between schematic and structural axiomatization. The first one consists in the classical procedure, just expressed in terms of the now familiar color of Gonseth's theory of knowledge concerning abstract entities. Objects and relations have names, and the axiomatization consists in sharpening this language by sematization and in adapting some claims about these objects and relations are the starting point for the logical deduction. Georg will speak about this. This is exactly your two distinction of structures is in Gonseth. The later one, so the second one, is an adoption naturally of Hilbert's formal axiomatization, interpreted in the right Freudian way. Objects and relation occurs only as links in an overall structure, and the axiomatic system makes assertion about this overall structure. The two ways of axiomatization are at different levels of abstraction for Bernays. So in the first level, we have to be schematic abstraction and then this structural abstraction. Schematization, axiomatization is based on a language in which ontological commitment is supposed to be known, where one has a proper names or a fixed domain of quantification that has to be at our disposition. On the other hand, in the structural axiomatization, The objects are only known as members of a structure, itself given by explicit definition, thanks to the indication of its actions. He gives Bernays' example to group axioms. Of course, what is defined as neither the dominant objects nor the composition. Those two occur only implicitly in the definition. What is defined instead is the notion of a group, or better, the condition under which a domain of objects together with a composition operated, defined on its form a group. On it forms a group. So clearly now a very useful definition. I think you are right in every way, so the structural point of view, but I think it is not so the Bourbaki's structure, because Bourbaki's structure are more a tool to, this is Jean's, we wrote an article about this the structure in Bourbaki. Now your last question, Poincare and Gonseth. Yes. According to Gonseth, the geometrical actions are to be explained by a genesis, which he programmatically gives out as a methodical mediation of the logical construction in Hilbert 1899 and Poincare's consideration of the genesis of the movement group, the movement group, the translation group, transformation group. Yeah. In recollection of the ability of our mind of free creativity, it is for model formation, one has to transform, says Gonseth, Poincare's psychological explanation of the representative space into a logical genesis of the geometric space. As you know, if you read Poincare, it was a logical reconstruction and not a psychological reconstruction. This is my, naturally influenced by Gonseth, this is my way to read Poincare, because it always is speaking of emergent sensation. He's not interested in sensation experience, emergent sensations. So even if Gonseth's technical execution of the program, which follows more Dingler's version, falls short for Poincare of Poincare's group theoretical realization, his philosophical analysis is an important contribution to understand Poincare's approach of the genesis of geometry. I think this was vulgarized in a certain circle, this point of Poincare. He was always neglected. So this on you.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe just only one comment concerning Poincare.
Yes.
Now, Poincare, I would say, okay, he says there is some, and I don't know on which term we should agree, some kind of intuitive induction, which is given, which we have to start with, no? So where on which level induction takes place for Poincare?
I mean, he is first, there is a iteration process, and then the iteration process look out on another level of the iteration process, and then he sees there can always be, he remarks it very well, that there's another level, he can always be continued. And this is naturally very strong induction, but it is only for, not for all quantifiers, but only for the parameter in the induction clause. You cannot have, because Poincare has not the position that there is all a totality of a domain. But that's you. Paolo, you are not.
Just a doubt concerning this issue about the variable. Well, since you asked me, one point that I'd like to make is that when we look at Hilbert on this issue of induction, it's very important to see that when they talk about the form of induction that can be used in the meta theory, they start with something that is quite striking. I mean, if you look at where they specify what exactly they mean by weak induction in 1922, 1923, this is spelled out only in the articles by Bernays on Hilbert's new approach to the foundations. And what they mean is actually only looking at finite figures. In other words, they are kind of the principle of the least number, but always applied to a finite configuration. Mm-hmm. So it's almost, I mean, it's doing induction on a finite figure. It never is, in fact, even going to the potential infinite at the beginning. Then they give up because they realize this is too weak. And in fact, it's Oskar Becker that pushes them in mathematische Existenz in saying, look, you guys think you can just get away even from the potential infinite, but you can't, exactly because you need to generalize over all these proofs of any line.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, but the last thing, the comment I was making to Marco is, I'm worried a bit about this emphasis on the variable and the fact that is the variable that sort of commits you to the actual infinite. Because after all, if you look at Heiting's intuitionistic arithmetic, it's an arithmetic in which you do have variables. I mean, but you're not committed to an actual infinite. You can stay with the potential infinite, even with the variables.
Okay, so this is from a systematic point of view, but we was now in the discussion of Hilbert and Poincare, and so Hilbert insisted, nevertheless, on this in this Foundations of Mathematics published in the von Reinhard volume on the variable. This is the difference for him. And I think we should, can you interpret it? I mean, if he says, induction proper, which is based on the induction axiom and through which alone the mathematical variable can begin to play its role in the fundamental system. What means the variable if it is not in the final clauses of for all x, because naturally the weak induction is only a parameter, fr. That you have fr for r, for any r. And I think this is the point of Poincare, that it's only that you can, by intuition, you can only have this weak sort of intuition, but because otherwise you have to presuppose a totality of domain, and this is contrary to Poincare, to presuppose it. His justice is the iteration process.
Actually, for my argument, I was putting forward, or the question I was putting, Paolo made a very important point that, of course, Hilbert's proof theory developed. But what my point was that at least the starting idea was, okay, let's take up Poincaré's, in fact, I think it was more Weil's and Brouwer's point, but let's say just in the meta theory, we take that for granted what Poincare would still allow.
Yes.
And that we want to use for a consistency proof. And then it turns out, as Paolo said, even Oskar Becker made it explicit, let's say, well, with such a weak, or maybe weaker, as Weil said in the obituary that Hilbert was more proper than the Pope, when at least with respect to intuitionism he changed to finitism. But I think the idea was we take Poincaré's, Brouwer's, Weil's point of view, and now we want to justify stronger systems. Leaving aside that with Gödel, and as they themselves realized before already, they need some stronger, let's put it in the variables or quantifications, but the original idea, using some form of least number principle to justify stronger theories. Would that be okay for Poincare? Or would he say, no, I mean, we cannot even go up, let's say that we take one theory, a weaker theory to justify a stronger theory?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I cannot. I should answer. No, answer you, Marco. Answer.
I think you wanted to say something about
the amendments to Kahle and then the comparison between. It's just of topics concerning your dialogue, but returning to Reinhard Kahle and his comparison between Hilbert's and Poincare structuralism. What I would like to say is there is a further aspect we should mention, and which I think to be a big difference between Hilbert and Poincare, namely, in the foundations of geometry, Hilbert nearly doesn't mention words like Auge, Anschauung, it's in German, Anschauung, and so on. Yeah, he once says ins Auge fassen, but that's another question. While Poincare very intensively follows the aspect of space perception, and that leads him into another aspect concerning the interaction between man or our esprit or our mindset with reality and our potentials to interpret reality, or even, what I'd like to say, to generate structured reality. And it's just an amendment. It's not critic in what you said, but a further aspect we could keep in mind when doing comparisons between Hilbert and Poincare.
Actually, I think that is an important point. Nevertheless, that I try to distinguish in that aspect about conventionalism. Of course, Hilbert considers all types of geometries. That is the purpose of the independence proofs he's doing, is constructing geometries which are obviously not related to Anschauung and what intuition, just to show that certain axioms are independent from the others. And so what he is doing, he is providing a bunch of formal theories. And now it's a second question, which Hilbert intentionally didn't answer, to choose the appropriate one. And that was where Poincare comes in and says, okay, there's not one true and the other false or truer, but one is the appropriate one for our Anschauungsraum. But that is a question, Hilbert goes around. And it's very nicely described by Pasch, to which, Hilbert owns, the central idea of his abstract axiomatization. Pasch speaks about die Vorhalle der Geometrie, the narthex of geometry, where we have to choose the motivations for one or the other axioms. But my point is indeed, let's say that, Hilbert is aware of this question, but he says, we are working on another topic. By the way, that is one of the criticism of Kreisel at some point, where he says, oh, Hilbert should not have checked what follows from the axioms, but what are the axioms you want to choose. They were aware of that, but only because they did the other work perfectly to tell us or to investigate what follows from axioms, what are the properties. Kreisel cannot just change the rules of the game. Still, let's say that is exactly where I think it comes, this complementary of Poincare and Hilbert. Hilbert developed how to work with formal theories, and Poincare tells us how to choose. I hope. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that now we could hear Gerhard answers to Jean Petitot.
Marco.
Oh, sorry.
No, I wanted to tell something about the last question about Poincare and Gonseth, because it is a quite surprising question to me, because Poincare died in 1912, and when Poincare died, Gonseth was just a university student. Yeah. So there is, of course, no sort of relation in one sense.
Voilà.
That's the first point.
No.
On the other sense, a question as more delicate. Certainly, Poincare and Gonseth developed a large reflection on the foundation of mathematics, and certainly Poincare was one of his referents. So, of course, in this sense, there is an influence. Poincare is one of the objects on which Gonseth reasoned. But I think that, and there is the question, the point that Gerhard made about the origin of geometry, the research of an empirical origin of geometry. But I think that possibly there is another point of contact that should be studied, of contact, of influence of Poincare and Gonseth, and it's Gonseth's notion of hedonism that is not so different from Poincare conventionalism. So I don't know exactly what is the... Gonseth never mentioned Poincare with respect to hedonism, at least to my best knowledge. But I think that it would be difficult not to connect this idea of hedonism with Poincare conventionalism in geometry.
Thank you very much. Naturally, I made it in my book on Poincare. Naturally, you're absolutely right. I forgot it. So, yeah, but this is a general perspective. Thanks.
A short one.
Yeah, short. About this point, I think the important point is to raise the question: what is the synthetic a priori for Poincare? Because Poincare is conventionalist for the geometry, but for the principle of induction, he says that this principle is a synthetic a priori principle.
Yeah.
And this is in la science de l'hypothèse.
No,
alors, what kind of synthetic a priori? Alla Friedman, come a contingent a priori, or a Kantian or a Cassirer, and depending on the answer that we give to this question, we have different answer for all the problems that we have touched. Thank you.
Yes. Very shortly, Poincare introduced a synthetic a priori in this context because he has to find expression. He said it explicitly. Because I have no other expression, I call it synthetic a priori. It is now we anticipate the question of Paolo, and he accepted. He says the complete induction is necessary for mathematics, so it is impredicative, so we should accept it. And then it is a synthetic a priori, because a priori we do it ourselves, so this is an operative function of a priori, and the synthetic a priori, he said, is a vocabulary from Kant. But it is only the vocabulary. He said it explicitly, because he should find, don't know, he's not a philosopher, he gave a name of this. But it means for him, accept it at this state, and then we go further. And this, we will return to this question. Okay.